Hello everyone. Welcome to AI Tools Research Channel. I'm Zeb Batty. In this video, we'll explain how artificial intelligence really works and go into detail on what's going on behind the scenes in an AI neural network. So first, you've most probably heard from some famous, incredible people that artificial intelligence will take over the world and it will be the end of humanity. Is this a sensible warning of things to come? Or is this just an alarmist overreaction to technology that most people don't fully understand as yet? It is just normal for people to be scared of a technology that is unknown. So in this video, we're going to get into some detail about what is going on inside an artificial neural network and how do they really work. Neural networks are at the heart of AI. We're hoping you'll become more informed and aware, and will be able to understand just how the AI mind, if we call it that, actually works. We'll delve into how AI performs the tasks that it is programmed to do. So let's get started with what is an artificial neural network. Basically, an artificial neural network at its core is a mathematical equation. A powerful artificial neural network has very complex math equations. The term neural network comes from its analogy to the human brain, or the human neural network. The term neuron comes from nerve cells in the human brain. These nerve cells, or neurons, are the fundamental units of the brain and nervous system. They are responsible for receiving sensory input from the external world, for sending motor commands to our muscles, for creating images of what our eyes see, and for transforming and relaying the electrical signals at every step in between. Imagine a neuron as a microscopic maestro, orchestrating the symphony of your thoughts, feelings, and movements. That's the essence of a human neuron, the fundamental unit of your nervous system. These tireless tiny titans are responsible for everything from the flutter of your heartbeat to the spark of inspiration in your mind. Here's how you can picture this wonder of biology. There is the power center. At the heart lies the soma, the neuron's cell body. Think of it as the conductor's podium, housing the nucleus, the brain of the cell, and other organelles that keep things running. Then there are these branches reaching out from the soma. These are called neuron dendrites. Dendrite comes from the word tree or dendron in Greek. They are delicate fibers that act like an antennae. Dendrites reach out to receive messages from other neurons, like eager listeners awaiting the conductor's baton. All this messaging is running on the information highway. The axon is the neuron's long, slender cable, the information superhighway, carrying its outgoing messages. Imagine it as the conductor's outstretched arm, sending signals to other neurons or even muscle cells to trigger actions. The spark that ignites the messaging is the axon. The axon ends in a synapse, a specialized junction, where it meets another cell. Basically, the synapse is that junction between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another, through which the two neurons communicate. Here, the neuron releases chemical messengers called neurotransmitters that bridge the gap, carrying the signal like musical notes from one instrument to another. With non-stop messages flowing on the neural information highway, between billions of intricately connected neurons, this vast network is like a symphony of connections. It's a dazzling ballet of signals, constantly in flux, shaping our every thought, decision-making, action, and experience. This is what we call a neural network. So the next time you marvel at the beauty of a sunset, the power of a hug, or the complexity of a thought, remember the silent heroes behind it all, the humble, yet magnificent human neuron. Well, it is actually a network of 86 billion neurons. That's how many neurons are in an average human brain. It is the neurons that give us the ability to do anything. They send the signal to the various parts of our body to act, and they also send signals to other parts of our brain that enable us to think and make decisions. Neurons in an artificial neural networks are parallel to what the human brain neural networks do, and that's why the nomenclature is similar. One thing you must know, and that is the neurons in a human brain are many times more complex and advanced than neurons in an artificial neural network. Despite basic concept similarities, artificial neurons do not work exactly the same way as the biological neurons do. Therefore, the analogy with artificial neurons should be limited to the basic network structure, as it applies to the way that they are both networked and not the way that they fully function. In an artificial neural network, we connect multiple neurons together and form a neural network which we can then train to perform a task. When you hear the term pre-trained model, that is essentially what has happened. The neurons in the artificial neural network connect and pass messages forward to the neurons in the next layer in the network, and the next, and so forth, until the entire network has been trained on terabytes of data. This is similar to the biological neurons, neural network in our brain, which also connect and pass messages forward to other neurons. So you can see why it makes some sense to draw this comparison of our brain, which is the biological neural network and the artificial neural network. Let's see how an artificial neuron works and compare it to a biological neuron. The biological neuron has a cell body with a nucleus. This is the core of the neuron where the processing takes place. Around the cell body, there are dendrites, which are the ones that receive signals. They are the signal receivers. They take in the inputs, which the cell body can then processes. In a similar way, each neuron in a neural network in a tiny computer program, which is essentially a mathematical function. We call this a node. The node receives some input and has some parameters to guide its function. It takes the input, processes it, and creates an output which can be passed along to the next node, or neuron. This is analogous to dendrites, and the output is analogous to terminal axons. The artificial neurons function in the neural networks like the cell body with a nucleus in the human brain. Artificial neurons can also be connected to each other via something analogous to synapses. While an individual neuron can be simple and might not do anything or too impressive, it is the networking of neurons that makes them so powerful, and the network is the core of the artificial intelligence systems. The essence of an artificial neuron is this simple equation where X is the input, W is the weight, B is a bias term, and the result or output is Zx. What that means essentially is that an input X is being modified by multiplying with a weight, and then a bias is added to it in order to get a result or output. This allows the artificial intelligence system to map the input value X to some preferred output value, Zx. So how are W and B, which is the weight and the bias, determined? This is where training comes in. We have to train the parameters W and B into the AI systems, such as the input can be modified into the most appropriate or correct output. So how is the training done? Let's use a simple example so that you can get an idea and a feel for what is really going on. Let's say you have a $5 bill. You are trying to determine if you can afford to buy a cup of coffee. The cost of the coffee is $3, so the inputs are $5, representing the money that you have, $3 for the cost of coffee. And the question is, can I afford this cup of coffee? You know the answer should be yes, or the output should be yes, and you're trying to train the system to give you a yes result. Initially, the system may choose an arbitrary value for the weight and bias. You enter the inputs and see what the output is. If the output is a no, the system adjusts the weight and bias and keeps iterating until the correct answer, yes, is given in the output. Then you change the input to $2 and repeat this process again. You know the answer now should be no this time, so if the output is a yes, then the system adjusts its weight and bias again, until the output is arrived at a no. Similarly, the inputs are changed over many iterations until the system output gives the correct answer over a variety of inputs. This is what training an AI model is all about. It is about doing the iterations over and over again until you receive the desired output. Note that when we have multiple inputs, the function Zx, representing the neuron, is modified to be a sum as shown like this in the diagram. If you think about how our own mind works, we sort of do the same thing. We take in all the inputs and we process them with the numbers in the math that we have learned over time, and the math that we understand. With this, we figure out what we can afford and what we can't. Essentially, this is what a neural network can do as well, but just by using purely mathematics in a more explicit way. Now let's examine how nonlinearity is built into artificial neural networks. There's a problem with our equation that we just covered. The case just shown is a very simple yes or a no output. Our function zx, which is a simple linear equation, can provide the correct output. But what happens when the boundary conditions are not linear? When the output cannot be simply as simple as a clear-cut yes or a no? For example, what if you are financing an expensive car for a customer at a bank and want to use an AI system to determine how much money you can lend a particular customer? In this case, many inputs would be needed and taken into account. Things like the person's income, their driving record, their work history, economic conditions, and the terms of the loan, interest rates, amount of cash deposit, and a host of other factors. In this case, the output would not have such a distinct linear boundary. The output might look more like the chart on the right. A problem like this is solved by using a mathematical trick, which is called an activation function. The activation function represents or is represented by an A in this formula, and it's a mathematical function we apply to our output Zx. There are different choices for an activation function, but a good example is the sigmoid function. A sigmoid function is a mathematical function having a characteristic S-shaped curve, also called a sigmoid curve. It is a bounded differentiable real function that is defined for all real input values and has a non-negative derivative at each point and exactly one inflection point. An example of a sigmoid function is like this. This mathematical treatment allows for a greater variability in the decision boundary by introducing nonlinearity to the linear formula Zx. The following images show how a linear decision boundary can be modified for far more complex decision-making, and with the addition of an activation function, our flowchart is modified to look more like this, where the activation function, the sigmoid function in this case, is added as additional step in the process before we get a final result. So with an appropriate activation function, there is nothing stopping AI from answering much more complex questions. Keep in mind that with a single neuron we can only do so much. We can't do a lot. And you need more neurons to account for the complexity of deciding, for example, how much money to loan to a customer to buy a certain car. We use the single neuron as an example to give you a general understanding, since you can see the fairly simple math behind it, but it's not complex enough to do much by itself beyond this, even with the power of nonlinearity activation functions. It is the combination of several neurons that form a very complex network, what we call a neural network, that has the real power. So when we make complex networks with thousands and millions of neurons that are used in programs like ChatGPT from OpenAI or AI Bard from Google, we can obtain some incredible results. If you probably have not noticed already, if you've used any of these apps and found them interesting, it is because they have hundreds of layers and millions of neurons and parameters. Now you may be wondering, what is so scary about this? What is the big fear? Why are the informed scared and are also scaring the crap out of the uninformed? Well, there is a very legitimate reason for it, and this has to do mostly with training a neural network to obtain certain known results. The simple case was the example of whether we could afford to buy a cup of coffee or not. In such a case, there is not much processing that needs to happen in these various neurons or nodes. But for more complex results, such as how much money can be loaned to a customer for a car, or other complicated demands, the adjustments that the system makes in the training process is a bit tricky and is hidden in what we can call a black box. What exactly do we mean by this black box? When we train the AI neural network using known inputs and known outputs, we are having the system self-adjust its internal networking results from the various nodes to match what the known result should be. This training process, or training the model, is how exactly the network adjusts the various layers of intermediate outputs to achieve the final output. What we may want is not really known. In other words, we don't know how the system is adjusting all the intermediate layers or the middle layers that are not the input or the output layer. The input and output layers are known, but the stuff inside is not. And so the intermediate layers of neurons, we can call them hidden layers, are what we earlier called the black box. We don't really know what these various layers are doing or what is happening inside the black box. They're performing some transformation of data which we don't understand. By the way, this is also where the term transformer comes from, like generative pre-trained transformer or GPT. This is not to say that we can't find the calculated result from any particular node. We certainly can, because the nodes are just performing and doing mathematics. But the result will not make any sense to us. It would just appear as some arbitrary number, which the network has determined to be a suitable intermediate in order to correctly obtain the final result in the output layer. It is the combination of numbers in the various individual nodes of the hidden layers in the network that result in the real power of AI. So we have this huge black box in the middle which does complex transformations by stitching together the simple linear equation with an activation function to create complex, highly nonlinear outputs which maps the given inputs to that output. Some people consider this hidden or unknown processing the really scary problem because they say, since the network is doing things we don't understand, it could start to do things on its own and pose a threat to humanity eventually. This argument is controversial because these networks are doing only what they are trained to do. They are just doing math. This is not to say that they couldn't be trained to behave in more complex ways in the future, but with what we know today, there is no way these networks can do anything that they are not trained to do or make decisions on their own. And of course, an evil person could train an AI to do bad things, and this is what we have to watch out for. But how is this any different than evil people and hackers we have today that are using computers to do nasty things? No AI technology-based or neural networks today could become something like the Skynet that you saw in the Terminator movies, or those fictional movies where robots suddenly become conscious and threaten mankind. So, what is the real threat of AI? We think the real threat of AI is in its power to do things that humans do today and thus potentially eliminate jobs. This is the main threat, and this is the main thing we need to contend with today, and that's going to happen whether we like it or not. AI might eliminate some jobs, but will also continue to help to do other jobs better than humans, and as well as create some new ones. AI actually may take away many jobs and create many new jobs, but it's unlikely to end humanity, at least until us humans have a mind that is functioning and is rational. Actually, the higher probability is that humans may use AI as a technology as we use any other technology to destroy each other. This likely will happen much before AI can figure out how to destroy humanity. Thanks for watching. The AI Tools Research Channel will bring you much more interesting stuff in the future, so please subscribe if you found this video helpful. And don't forget to press the like button.